brought to you by Form Systems, the leader in API and cloud gateway technology.
Tonight, I would like to present and demonstrate one of our products. The product is called APItools, and it's targeting developers, so that's entirely for developers in open source. So feel free to play around with that. It has nothing to do with machine learning or predictive APIs itself, but it is a productive or production tool which helps you to integrate with all sorts of different web APIs. So let's have a look at that. What is APItools? APItools essentially is a proxy which sits right in between an API provider's API on the one side and an application or a service on the other side. It's basically a proxy which helps you as a developer to manage the various API integrations you have, to monitor them, to analyze them, to secure them, and also, which is probably the most powerful feature of APItools, to modify requests and responses. So, in a sense, APItools is about two things. So we're doing two things very well. The first one is managing and monitoring APIs, third-party web APIs, and secondly, it's all about modifying API calls. As I said, pretty much how it works, it's straightforward. It's a proxy. So on the one hand, we have all sorts of web APIs. In my demo, I will use bsync and BigML and also Google Maps API. On the other end, we have the developer's application, and in between we have APItools. So the requests and the responses are redirected through APItools, and then on APItools, you can do all these things like managing APIs, transforming API calls, and analyzing API calls. So for the demo tonight, and I have 15 minutes, so I try to be really short and crisp and just show you basically the most important stuff. I integrated bsync. Who knows bsync? Yeah, the local guys from Barcelona know bsync. It's basically a bicycle renting service. So all over the city, all over Barcelona, you have these various bsync stations where you can rent a bike and then bring it back somewhere else. So I will integrate bsync. I'll use BigML and I will use Google Maps, all integrated into APItools. So this is the demo flow in words, but I skipped that in the interest of time. That's the demo flow in pictures. So what I will do is first I will take those two APIs, bsync and BigML, configure APItools accordingly. Then I will test it with Postman. Who in the room knows Postman? Postman is the one here on the right. Postman is an extremely handy tool for testing RESTful APIs. So before you integrate an API into your service or mobile app or whatever, Postman is really useful to see how the API behaves. So I will show you that. As a next step, I will then show you the various middlewares which I developed. So these are the small code modules hosted on APItools, where the API request and the response go through and are modified. So I will do an XML to JSON converter. I will filter the bike stations according to geography. So for that, Google Maps comes in. Then I will try to get the utilization prediction using BigML. And then I will actually customize the API so that I can, that I'm fully in control in which parameters go in and come out of the API. And then finally, we'll have a look at Postman again. Okay, so let's have a look. I'm switching to my browser. I need to just switch on this recording thing here for Luis. Just bear with me a couple of seconds. That's, by the way, is really handy. It's a web-based recording tool which you can use to record your screen. And I will use that to record the demo. All right, so there we go. I start with Postman. So this is Postman. As I said, it's a really handy tool for testing web APIs. And what I will test first is I will first just do a plain direct request against the bsync API. So bsync, as you remember, is this service for renting bicycles in Barcelona. This here is the base URL, of this API by bsync. And by the way, this API is not a public open API. It's basically something which my colleagues and I found out by trial and error. So it's not supposed to be like that. We're just reusing something which is not intended to be like that. And that's one of the consequences which happen if you don't manage or secure an API properly. So we found this base URL. Basically, when we issue this command, get stations here, we should get back a fairly long XML file. Fairly long. So these are all the stations with the current number of bytes per stations. Right? So this is what we get back. Now, obviously, if you build an app, we don't want to flood the users by sending around large XML files. And this is where APItools comes in. So let me swap to APItools. When you log into APItools, this is basically what you see. It looks usually a bit prettier. It's just because it's zoomed in. But these blocks here in the middle, what you see here, are all the various APIs are already integrated. And let me just show you how you would integrate with a new API. So I go back to my Postman here. Copy the base URL of the bsync API. And then I say add service. Give it a name, bsync API, and just paste in this base URL, which I just copied over, okay? And then I say save. And then basically, APItools gives me a new base URL, a new URL for this API, and that's that one. So basically, in my application or in my service, I would from now on use this URL instead of the APItools URL. And that means that then the call is always channeled through APItools, and then I can do all these modifications right on that proxy, right on APItools. Okay, before I now test this on Postman, let me just go to my service which I prepared. So this is the demo I prepared for this event. And the thing which I would like to explain first, because I think that's the most important, is this idea of the pipeline, okay? Right. So that's this pipeline concept. Here on the top, we have the application, which the developer develops. And then the request goes basically through those layers, which we call middleware, then ends up at the bsync endpoint, the real endpoint, and then the response is also passed through my middleware layers back to the application. So in those middleware layers, I can modify the request going into the API, as well as the response coming back from the API. And in between, I can do all sorts of fancy things. And the first thing I would like to do is transforming XML into JSON. Because as I said, we don't want to flood, ignore that. We don't want to flood our customers with huge, massive XML files. So these are those middleware layers, as I said. You can freely move them around or bring them in order. We have a couple of pre-built middleware layers, such as, for example, if you want to support cores, there's a pre-built middleware which you can just drag and drop into your pipeline. We don't do that now. And also this XML to JSON converter is one of those middleware layers which are available. Let's just have a quick look inside. Can you see that more or less? If you develop a middleware for APItools, you use a programming language which is called Lua. Lua is basically, it's very similar to JavaScript, but it's a little bit more performant. And it's very simple to learn, actually. So what we have here is, this is the middleware which we developed to transform XML into JSON. So the first part here is just a helper function, so we ignore that for now, and go to the main function, which is down here. And the important bits are basically those two lines, where first we get the body of the response, we parse it. So this is my helper function here at the top, where I would just extract a couple of essential elements of that XML file. In that case, it's the stations. And then would encode it as a JSON and copy it into the response for the object. And I would also set directly out of APItools the content type in the header, which would then be application JSON. Okay, so after that, after the response passed this middleware layer, and I'll go back out now, the next thing what I would do is I could basically use the BigML API to submit this data to have a model within BigML. And those people who attended the session in the very morning today will know what I'm talking about. So you can use the API to programmatically submit data into BigML. And then the next thing I did is I use a geo-distance filter. In that case, in that middleware, I have the logic to take only, I think, the 5 closest stations. I used Plaza Catalunya, so you can just submit the latitude and longitude data points and then find the closest stations to that particular point. And then I sort that stations. So these are the first 4 middlewares, basically relevant when the response is coming back from the bsync API. Okay, so let's see how that works. Going back here to Postman. And I'm now using, so these are all prepared API requests. I'm now using the second one. Right, so as you can see, this is now not the bsync URL anymore. What I'm now using is the one which I got from APItools. And now the whole thing is passed through APItools. And what I should now get back is a much, much shorter JSON response. There we go. So as you can see, it's first of all a lot shorter than what I had before. And that's only the 5 closest stations to the point I submitted, which was Plaza Catalunya here in Barcelona. Okay, so already by that we won a lot. It's much, much shorter and it's much more customized. Okay. Now let me explain the final 2 middlewares. So right now what we get back is just the stations. But what I wanted to achieve, and by now we have done 2 integrations, right? bsync and Google Maps. What I wanted to achieve is to get a prediction of how many bikes are at a certain station at a certain time. And for that I basically trained BigML. I didn't do it programmatically, I just used the web interface. I first captured a couple of data from bsync, created a CSV, and uploaded it to BigML. And now this is the middleware which I developed to get that prediction back from BigML. So it's actually fairly short, as you can see. That's all the code. But the important thing is, what I want to explain is, first of all, I introduced a new URL parameter. It's that one, get prediction. And if that is false, I would just get back the 5 closest stations, as I just showed. If it's true, then I'm actually wanting to get those predictions from BigML. So I will use another URL endpoint. I also integrated BigML into APItools, so not querying BigML directly, but I'm querying this new URL which I got from APItools. And then basically, I submit this as a GET response against a big URL. And what I get back is then those predictions which I encode into JSON and put into my response body and send it back to the client. Okay. And the final middleware, which I also want to explain briefly, is that I can also, so far I will get back all the predictions which I have in BigML. And with the final middleware, I added a couple of further custom URL parameters. So I added things like my location, a certain time which I want to get the prediction for, and the number of stations around this particular location. Okay, So that's my full stack of various middleware modules. Now let's go back to Postman and see how that behaves. Okay, so the next request I would like to demonstrate is the one where I set this custom URL parameter, which is called getPrediction. I set this to true. So if I set this to true, that means that we'll get all predictions which I have within BigML. Okay, so let's hide this, run this request again. How much time do we have left? It's over? Okay, almost finished. Right, so this would deliver back all the various predictions I have. I have 3 predictions within BigML. One is called prediction for bikes, and the other ones are just called Manfred's random prediction 1 and Manfred's random prediction 2. Right, so I got all those predictions back. I could use them if I want to, but I actually have a even more customized version of that API, and that's the 4th and final request. Now here, if you look at the various URL parameters, so this is all stuff which I defined within APItools. Now I have this parameter which is about getting predictions, yes or no. I can also define the prediction name. In that case, I would like to get the one which says prediction for bikes. I can set my latitude and longitude. I can set the number of stations, and I can set the number or I can set the time for which I would like to have this prediction. So it's all customizable, and I need to write the logic within APItools. Right, so let's hide this and run it again. And now we're getting back only one prediction, which is the one called prediction for bikes. And then I can do all this fancy stuff which, with that, what the BigML API would provide you. Okay. Right. To finish up, there are a range of benefits. I think the 2 most important benefits, especially for the hackathon, are the 2 at the bottom, I would say. So first, you have the possibility to modify the returned data exactly to your needs. So you can rip off all the stuff you don't need. You can make it a lot slimmer, and by that also a lot more user-friendly. And then finally, you can also customize the API syntax totally according to your needs. So whenever you want to send a particular request, like what I did, give me all the predictions back for a certain location at a certain time, and the original API does not provide that, then I can do that programmatically by using APItools. So I think those 2 things by itself are very powerful. At the moment, we're currently running an APItools middleware contest. If you want, feel free to participate. We have $1,500 in cash. And yes, Rescale, I said earlier, we're all about API management. Everything we do falls into 3 categories. We provide API management for API providers, such as BigML, for instance. We provide API management for developers, so APItools falls into that category. By the way, this sector is the only one which we monetize. And then finally, we do a lot in terms of API evangelism and education. So the most important thing is probably this API strategy conference we're holding. Well, and with that, I would like to conclude. Thank you very much for your attention. I will hang around for a while, so if you have questions during the hackathon, I'm more than happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Brought to you by Form Systems, the leader in API and cloud gateway technology.